What is going on, everyone? RonMan coming back at you, and today we're taking a look at Lagoon for the Super Nintendo. Also, if you're new here and you like my content, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as that bell notification so you stay up to date with RonMan Gaming. Lagoon is an action RPG that was developed by Kemco and published by Sika Corporation for the Super Nintendo in 1991, which means this is a very early Super Nintendo game. In fact, Lagoon was only the third RPG released for the system, the first being Draken and the second being Final Fantasy IV. Now, Lagoon is notorious for being an awful game. It's often considered one of the worst RPGs on the system. Its poor quality has reached legendary status, and despite that, I really enjoyed my time with this game. Yes, I recognize that this game has issues, a lot of issues. In fact, almost everything about this game is low quality. This game is objectively terrible, but this terrible game also has a lot of charm. There's something about it that I find to be very enjoyable, and I'll do my best to articulate that in this video. But let's begin with the story. Bear with me because it's absolutely not told very well, but from what I can gather, you play as Nasir, the hero of light. And in a nutshell, it's your job to defeat evil and cleanse the water. Yeah, like actual drinking water. Even on the back of the box, the first line reads, "Lakeland has a drinking problem." But it's referring to the fact that residents of Lakeland don't have anything clean to drink. There's an evil being named Zera who plans to revive an evil spirit, and his method of completing this task is by making the water muddy, you know, undrinkable. He wants people to drink the foul water and then die, which I guess brings the evil spirit into the picture. I'm honestly not sure if this is accurate, and that's because the text throughout this whole game is mangled. Lagoon is plagued by hilariously bad English, which is no doubt the result of poor translation. At the beginning of the game, the mayor actually says to you, "Please put these on and get ready to go." He then gives you 300 gold. That is hilarious. There's an item shop in the first town that, upon entering, is then referred to as a weapon shop, but the weapons are actually sold at the armor shop. Now, not all the text in the game is mangled, but a lot of it, while still coherent, is just plain funny. Again, in the first town, you can walk into a house, or more accurately, a place of faith, and this lady immediately responds to you with, "What do you want? Go home." Again, that is hilarious. Besides mangled or funny text, sometimes information is not even explained at all. I don't believe this game ever makes mention of the second boss or the fact that you need to kill him. It's like the developers just relied on the fact that you'd probably figure out what to do. You just have to stumble upon him and kill him. Now, it is possible that I just missed the reference, but I think it's more likely that the devs just didn't include any information at all. There's a lady in the first town who comments that they need clean water to run the restaurant. People throughout the game comment on how the water has become muddy, which is kind of ironic because you can also use the word muddy to reference a lack of rhetorical clarity, which is one of the main problems with Lagoon as a whole. Nothing makes sense. The plot is not clearly told to the player, but rather the details are muddy. Lagoon also suffers from unusual pacing. I'm not willing to say that this game has bad pacing because it actually keeps up a brisk speed. You can beat it in around 10 to 12 hours on a casual playthrough, but there are parts where they make you backtrack for absolutely no good reason. Here's the thing, backtracking can be an effective tool to make more out of the story or the game world, and if done correctly, it won't be irritating to the player. But in Lagoon, it really does seem like they just didn't plan the story events very well and were too lazy to fix these. This happens a couple times, but I'll share one example. At the beginning of the game in the first town, while speaking with the mayor and the priest, someone rushes in and, in a desperate panic, explains that someone was attacked near the cave. Due to the nature of this emergency, you're immediately warped to the area. There's someone lying on the ground who's seriously injured. He explains that the demons attacked him and stole a child named Jills. Well, this is a pretty intense situation, and you better get in there quick to rescue that kid. Except, these guards won't let you. Before they allow you into the cave, you'll need to go back to town and buy weapons and armor. It turns out you cannot buy the weapons and armor before this cutscene occurs. It's impossible. I just think it's really funny that they present this high-level emergency, rush you over to the scene, and then shatter all momentum by making you go back to town to buy weapons. They could have easily fixed this problem in a couple of different ways. Either have one of these NPCs give you the equipment that you need, or allow you to buy the equipment before the cutscene. This leads me to the combat. Lagoon has some of the absolute worst combat I have ever seen in an RPG. The biggest and most obvious issue is the length of your sword. It's so short. Even people who've never played Lagoon know of the infamous toothpick sword. And sadly, that's just the start of it. Lagoon does not give the player any invincibility frames or iframes. In many other games, after taking damage, you'll flicker and will be invincible for a short time. Well, if you ever wondered why iframes exist, play Lagoon and you'll see why they're so important. Even the smallest enemy can drain your life so fast and end your journey. Thankfully, you can save just about anywhere, so make sure to save often. You never know when an enemy will suddenly appear and end your life in the blink of an eye. All enemies have practically no AI. Most of them just move completely at random. Some of them do make shallow attempts to follow the player, but most of them act like the NPCs you'd find in a town but who also cause contact damage. Sometimes they may shoot a projectile, but it's very clear that most enemies just kind of exist in their own little world, and if they happen to hurt you, great. And what makes matters worse is that the enemy AI stays this way throughout the whole game. It doesn't get better. Sadly, this lack of AI is true for the bosses as well. Lagoon has some of the worst boss fights I have ever seen. During my playthrough, I mostly enjoyed it and even found it comical. The only times I ever got frustrated were with the boss fights. There were times where I actually wanted to rip the cartridge out of my Super Nintendo and throw it across the room. It's so frustrating. These boss fights were so poorly programmed that it often left me stunned. I had no words, like, really? This is a thing? They felt incredibly cheap. How could any of these fights pass quality assurance measures? Did anyone playtest these bosses? In all of these encounters, you really do just need to figure out how to cheese the boss. A lot of the time, you just have to find the right place to stand and swing away with your toothpick. None of the bosses have predictable patterns. Just like regular enemies, they behave at random. You honestly just have to get lucky. Sometimes I'd fight a particular boss and drain its health in a matter of milliseconds, and other times they would drain my health in a matter of milliseconds. Each and every boss fight is just a matter of finding out how to cheat and hope you get lucky. Here's one of the hardest bosses in the game. The only thing she does is warp and shoot fireballs. The fireballs always shoot in the same pattern, but where she warps to is always a mystery. She moves faster the more you damage her. I fought her probably 30 times until I finally got lucky and was able to kill her. This boss was only hard because she wasn't programmed well. In fact, her programming is very basic. Just shoot these fireballs, warp, then shoot more. There were even times where she would warp right on top of me at the beginning of the fight and cause damage. How is that fair? I won this fight because I got lucky, not because of my skill. Do you know how sometimes when you hear someone talk about another video game in terms of the difficulty, they might say something like, "When you die, it's your fault. You made the mistake." Well, in Lagoon, it's the opposite. Anytime I died, I really did feel like it was the game's fault. The combat in Lagoon is absolutely terrible, but I still liked it. This is an RPG, and leveling up does help. Every time you get a level up, your strength, defense, and HP increases. I finished the game at level 35, which is the max level, and even still, enemies drained my health in an instant. Also, you do not get notified when you score a level up. It's not that big of a deal, but I still found it to be a weird design choice. I'm sure programming a simple jingle would have been easy enough. I'm sure it'll come as no surprise, but the sound effects are subpar. There are so many things in this game that just don't contain any sort of sound effect. Besides there being no audio cue for your level ups, swinging your sword, jumping, and taking damage all don't have sound effects. But using magic and delivering damage do have sound effects. But what may actually be a surprise is that Lagoon's music is fantastic. This game starts out with a rockin' banger. I am not kidding. I don't think I heard a bad music track in the whole game. All of the music is great. In my opinion, it's Lagoon's biggest strength. Unfortunately, I can't keep the positivity going because now it's time to talk about the graphics. Lagoon is not a great looking game. The monsters and NPCs are dull and lack definition. Also, this game's favorite color is brown. Don't get me wrong, some areas are nice and colorful with lots of blues and greens. In fact, I particularly enjoyed this area here on the clouds where you can see the lush green land below, along with the waterfall. But there are many areas that look just like this. They definitely overused brown. At one point in the game, I was walking on brown, my hair is brown, and my cape was also brown. You know, the Super Nintendo is capable of more colors. On top of the bland graphics, the whole game is devoid of small touches and flourishes, which could have brought Lakeland to life. Most areas are just big open sections with little to do or see. Sure, you're fighting enemies and may stumble on the occasional treasure chest, but for the most part, you're not missing much. The dungeons too all suffer from this lack of imagination. They're all big and maze-like, and are chock full of empty rooms, which are chock full of nothing. There's not even an in-game map either, so I recommend using maps that you can find on the internet, otherwise you might be walking around aimlessly for a long time. Enemies are just kind of scattered throughout the world with seemingly little thought. There are some areas where there are so many monsters, the game will actually lag, but other areas contain zero monsters at all. In one of the final dungeons, there's a whole floor where there are no enemies at all. Like, did they forget? So this review has mostly been negative, but for good reason. Lagoon is a low-quality, poorly made game. That is a fact. But like I said at the beginning of the video, I really did enjoy Lagoon, and I will play it again one day. But I guess one question you might have is, why did I like this game if it's so awful? Well, I found Lagoon to be charming. I think this is because of how unintentionally funny it is. The dialogue and the combat are hilarious. There's an in-game cutscene much later on that had me on the floor laughing. Here it is. Besides Lagoon's comedic factor, it's a pretty traditional RPG and is somewhat fast-paced, which I liked. You're constantly moving forward while exploring towns, dungeons, and the overworld. Sure, there's not much to see, but you are moving fast, so you don't need to stop and smell the roses. Lagoon's combat is terrible, but the saving grace is that you can save anywhere in the game, besides during boss fights. I will say, if you couldn't save anywhere, there's no way I would have had the patience for this game. I also liked finding new equipment. I think it's neat that each armor set is a different color, other than the one armor set with the brown cape. What were they thinking? The magic system is also pretty cool. It all comes down to staves and crystals. There are many different spells in the game, so I think you should experiment to see which one you like the most. Also, I like that HP and MP refill automatically while standing still. Yes, the combat is jank, but it's far from a deal breaker. I've said this before in other videos, but I'll say it again here. To me, the worst thing an RPG can be is boring. And thankfully, Lagoon is not boring at all, but it's not for everybody. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest is a game that was made by professionals for beginners. Lagoon is a game that was made by beginners for professionals. Besides the obvious, what I mean is that Lagoon is not for the casual gamer. It's for the RPG enthusiast, and even then, only the Super Nintendo RPG enthusiast. Do you love Super Nintendo? Do you love RPGs? Well then check this game out. Have an open mind and be ready to laugh. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate the support. Please make sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.